Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Prototype. This is my personal podcast. I'm Pronoco, as the name might suggest, with a big ol' line through the O to make it obvious that it's a zero. Can you believe the technology we have? Well, feast your eyes. We have a very work-in-progress version of the organ tile set as the backdrop of today's video, today's podcast. But also, of course, we have the Goliath tastefully airbrushed and placed in there, such as you can imagine. This is really a tile set that is possible to create within StarCraft 1. Yes, indeed, that is possible. In fact, it already is technically in there, although, again, in a very work-in-progress state that is not yet finished. But yeah, cool stuff, and we get to see the Goliath again because it's pretty Chad. Love myself some Goliaths, love me some Goliaths. Let's talk about Cosmonic Brood War. Let's talk about plans and updates and all that other stuff for the game, for video content, for the tournaments, and for actual in-game content like, tutorials and campaigns and stuff. And I also have a bit of a sort of like, it's hard to call it an announcement, but I'll sort of spitball pitch a plan to you guys for non-RTS game development and world building development in general. After all of those other things are done. So you can rest assured, strap yourselves in if you're interested in that sort of thing. You can either skip ahead in the timestamps or just get yourself there by listening to the rest of this. And yeah, we are once again recording an episode of Prototype. It's kind of funny because 26 is not really like a big number. It's not like a number with any significance to me per se. But the fact that we are getting into these kinds of positions where, we're more than a quarter of the way to episode 100, for whatever that means, right? It feels like, this is continuing strong and people are appreciating and enjoying the content and the development. And we've certainly seen an increase in the number of people who are playing Cosmonic Brood War and engaging with our ideas for the future of the RTS genre, as well as, at least like in terms of, maybe they don't buy in to the idea that like, okay, we're the only ones who are going to make a good RTS game, and that's fine, that's their prerogative. But if they at least buy into the idea that we are some people who will make a good game within the RTS genre, and we are already demonstrating good fundamentals with CMBW, then I think Cosmonic Brood War itself, the most ambitious mod for StarCraft, and why a lot of people will be listening to this podcast, and why a lot of people will be in our server playing that game all the time. Yeah, that's why a lot of them are here. And I think it's doing its job if it's demonstrating some of our ideas. But we are always looking to improve, and Cosmonic Brood War will be receiving some changes and improvements with its next big update. In fact, I am going to be shipping some bug fixes in addition to some of these interesting new features to the release version before the playoffs of Ascension 5, because they don't actually change the meta per se. It's fixing like one bug with regression and burrowed units. It's fixing an unfortunate bug where I essentially forgot to delete something from a list, and that gave it the wrong energy count for a specific unit, which thankfully hasn't altered any games yet because we didn't see that unit be deployed. But assuming it gets to the point where you do see that unit, it would be nice if you could, actually use its ability. So that's a bit of a goof. And then there's also some other improvements like we do have middle mouse button scrolling. There is a small set of issues that still need to be resolved for that, but that's available for testing on pre-release. So it's pretty cool. Buttery smooth thanks to Veek7. And then DF helped me out. Shout out to Loller Skates as well for helping to test this, but DF helped me crack some final issues related to some variable definitions for a hook. And the long and short of it is that now we finally have a sound that plays when a player joins a lobby. Yes, we've backported that functionality from Remastered, you can say, because apparently there's a sound for that. Obviously, we play a different sound than what they do, and it's not a honk or anything, although for testing I did play the buzz error sound, which was pretty funny because it sounds like an error occurs when you join the game. But yeah, we've got that implemented, so that's long overdue. And now, when you host a lobby and then you alt-tab and forget about it, you won't be like, wait, why did I not hear somebody join? Because you will actually hear somebody join. So that's going to be a nice little change for going into the playoffs castings, in particular for the middle mouse button scrolling, especially once we work out the kinks in that. And beyond that, it's definitely going to be really nice to see other improvements and changes down the pipe to the meta of the game, which is not going to come to release because we're going to be preserving the meta as best we can. But one of the things that we will be doing when it comes to future updates, so you could imagine that this will be exclusively on pre-release until the conclusion of Ascension 5, is essentially we are going to be working on streamlining some of the issues that you might have spotted with, trying to do mech play as Terran. We'll be knocking down the cost of some of the scrapyard units, there's only 2 of them. So we'll be addressing some of those cases. We'll also be taking a look at if we can adjust the time cost of the scrapyard without it being a terrible idea. And Veek was privately messaging me about some time costs of other units that might benefit from being adjusted. Them being the Goliath and the Amaranth. I have not yet independently verified if that would be an improvement. Obviously, the Goliath is one example where if you increase the time cost, then you increase the amount of time before you can spend your money without queuing it, obviously, on another Goliath, which actually allows you to expand or tech up a little bit easier. Whereas I was kind of thinking about the Goliath as this unit where if you repeatedly spam it to get a lot of power here and now, and you sort of like fall into that, I wouldn't say a noob trap, but that would be like an angle where you think you're doing the right thing by queuing a lot of this unit, then it might actually be something that backfires, because then you have a lot of this unit that maybe you get diminishing returns of eventually, and your opponent meanwhile has a tech advantage or something because they didn't do that. But, there might still be a good argument to be made independently of that to increase the throughput, or I guess decrease the throughput. That was the word that Veek used, was throughput. Basically the idea that you can repeatedly keep using and getting uptime of your structure to train pretty heavy units. Obviously there's like an implicit time cost to the Goliath that's increased because you have to harvest more resources to be able to afford it. But generally speaking, I think you can afford like 2 Goliath production on 1 saturated base. So that would be 2 fulcrums producing Goliaths. If we add 5 seconds to the build time, it probably wouldn't make a huge dent in it for a negative side, and it might smooth out the idea that maybe I want to go for other units to do faster responses. But generally, I almost feel like that might not really be that necessary anyway, because ultimately, I don't think that you're like getting your first Goliath online anytime super soon. Because when you think about it, it's like, okay, I made my first Goliath. Well, the Fulcrum is already a longer unit, a longer structure for build time than the Stockade or than any of the other. Like it's among the longer options that you can grab for your first structure. So it doesn't really compute to me as like a huge issue, but that might be something that we see happen. The Amaranth might be more easy to justify. A lot of Protoss probably need a quick look over at the training time cost of all of their units, because so many of them are now consolidated. And then I was also I was watching the Zealot recently because it does feel like maybe it outcompetes the Golem and the Legionnaire a bit heavily. And instead of changing anything about its statistics, because I was thinking maybe I remove its armor pen, maybe I reduce its durability or something, maybe I drop its movement speed, I was actually thinking maybe we just increase the mineral cost of it by 25 minerals. So it's 125 minerals as opposed to the 200 of the Golem or the 75 of the Legionnaire. And specifically with the Legionnaire, I think that resolves the out-competing thing a lot, because, you're actually spending a pretty penny more on the Zealot than you are on the Legionnaire, instead of it being a difference of 25 minerals. And then you factor in the time cost, where the Zealot does cost more time. Then when you look at the Golem, maybe the Golem needs its own individual update, because it probably is a little bit not as durable as it could be, considering its low damage potential, although it does have some splash, which helps it against, sort of swarming frontliners or whatever. You think of, obviously, Zethicors, or you think of even if it can close the distance on them, you could think of Quasilisks and stuff, but you probably get more guaranteed damage out of the idol. So it might even be worth taking a look at the Golem for a larger revision, but for now we might think about maybe just increasing its durability so that it can actually hold fast for a little bit longer. Because currently I think it's pretty similar to the Zealot in terms of durability. It's a little bit better, and it has more armor probably, but beyond that it might just be like, oh yeah, this is kind of a whatever unit. So essentially just taking another look at some of these units that have received other kinds of changes, right? We're thinking of units that have been shuffled to different spots in the tech tree. Mostly that's Protoss, but then there's also the idea that like the Gosvaleth and the Talos are sourced differently now, where the Gosvaleth is still sourced from the Droleth, but you have the tier 2 requirement now instead of tier 3, and then the Talos is now on the Quarry, and the Parthenon was removed, and then obviously that meant that the Pythian moved over and shifted over to the nanite assembly. And there's been a broader conversation about Terran losing its 0.5 tech, similar to how Zerg lost it. And this is something that I kind of prophesized back when we removed it for Zerg, that I'm not really a super huge fan of that. And I was thinking that maybe one of the things that we can end up doing is just gutting the 0.5s entirely so that there is no more Fountainhead or Atelier, and instead you can choose to go straight for, nanite assembly as soon as your data load is finished, but it's now going to cost you a lot more money. And you could also imagine maybe, in the tier 2 sense, you could go straight for mantles, or you could go straight for the starport with the add-ons, whereas previously you had to build the Fountainhead in order to get the add-ons or get the mantle. But one of the things that means is that obviously all of those add-ons and maybe the units as well would receive price hikes. Particularly, I think some of the units that you might see out of the starport add-ons would probably receive price hikes. I don't know that maybe anything out of the mantle would. I guess Ramses feel pretty good as far as all-rounders are concerned, although they are 200 minerals a pop, and they don't hold up in the same way to something like a Goliath on a one-on-one basis, I don't think. So they might just need a different adjustment where maybe they need to have some different armor penetration or some less range or something like that to make them a little bit less... I mean, it's weird to say that you want an all-rounder unit to be less all-rounder, less well-rounded or whatever, but it does feel like maybe they're a little bit too simple of an option where they don't have crazy weaknesses. I could also maybe just drop their movement speed a bit so that they can't like close distances as fast, so that if you do close the distance on them, you can affect them pretty negatively. But I'm going to hold off on making any changes to them until after we consider what to do about 0.5s. Like, is the 0.5 cut going to happen in this pre-release update, or is that going to be happening a little bit later? We do have a lot of time, which I'll talk a little bit about when I get to the point about Ascension 5 schedule and the tournament frequency. But suffice it to say, there's definitely going to be some time to figure out other changes and maybe the fallout of the changes to gut 0.5 from the equation. I would also like to try to finalize the points about the 0.5 and actually make the choice to either keep it or leave it, or remove it, right? Before I make the Terran crash course video, which is actually coming up next. So as far as like crash courses and scripted video content goes, it's very likely that we'll see the Terran crash course be released next. So it would be nice to confirm that that is no longer going to be a thing, so that I don't have to comment about teching up in that way. I mean, I could comment in a vague way about teching up that could theoretically apply to both an add-on and not add-on version of the tech tree. But if I do that, then maybe we lose specificity, and there is power in that. So I'm just thinking in terms of writing the script, what is going to make it the most sensible for me? And I do think that it would be better and more sensible if I can take the approach of just saying, hey, there is no more 0.5, so don't even think about it. Don't even say it in the video, because the video is mostly for newer players who don't need to know that there used to be 0.5 exactly. One of the things that I will be stressing in those kinds of educational videos for sure, and something that I should stress here as well, is sort of how I talked about starting off this particular topic, that we're always looking to improve and change and balance the game in a better state. What does better mean, right? Like a sort of a brief tangent on, being balanced in the first place. I just want to make sure that the game is not in a position where one strategy is always the go-to in any particular given option. I mean, eventually you get granular enough that, okay, well, if my opponent is building this unit and in conjunction with these two other units, then I should really stress this kind of response. I mean, eventually you get to a point where it's probably inevitable to do that. But what I'm thinking is, in matchups, it's pretty widely accepted that, for example, you can't run bio against Protoss. And I'm not saying that you should be allowed to run bio against Protoss, and I'm speaking of StarCraft 1 by default here. But it would be nice if your subset of decisions, which will change depending on which race you're fighting, and I'm not trying to deviate from that formula, if ideally in the subset of all of your options, you still have a vast number of options, that's sort of where I'm looking at, right? Because the different options are necessarily going to play differently. They're going to reward different skills. You're going to be able to excel at one strategy where maybe you can't excel at a different one. You know, certain units that you might find work better for you, certain tactics, broadly speaking, that you can get a lot of mileage of. As an example, I love using drops. It's one of my favorite things in the game, especially if I'm playing Terran, which is probably my worst race in terms of performance. I guess I probably love it a little bit less when I'm playing as Protoss, and I don't think that it's super meta as Zerg, although it might become that once you hit, tier 2. You might see drop speed a little bit more frequent. But when it comes to playing as Terran, I love doing Hurakan drops. I love just, doing Doom drops even, if I can surprise my opponent that way. but it does necessarily have weaknesses, and it should. It should be something that leaves you vulnerable elsewhere. You're basically saying, I'm going to invest money and infrastructure and time and actions into having this very mobile force that can do surgical strikes, but if you attack me with a frontal assault, I will probably cave, because even though Terran is notoriously difficult to root out, I won't have most of my budget, most of my resources spent on units and military and defenses even. I'm not going to have most of those things in the right positions for it to really work. So that's like an example of what I'm talking about, where I would really love for people to be able to express themselves through the game, I guess. Even saying that, it kind of reminds me of like marketing buzzword nonsense, where it feels a little bit just generic. It's like not very interesting. A lot of people use that term as like, oh, you can really express yourself in our game, but they're talking about like spending money on cosmetics. I'm talking about my personality is kind of like, not necessarily to annoy you to death, but I want to find weaknesses in your defense network and expose them and abuse them. And, like if you give me an inch, I'll take a mile kind of deal. But in the specific context of like, I'm going to probe for weaknesses and find where you are weak and see if I can exploit that. And drops allow me to do that really well. And, when I play as the other races, I might play with Lachisilisks because maybe I know that you don't have mobile detection. And then I can find where you don't have mobile detection or static detection and try to abuse that, right? Benno found this out recently because he was practicing against my Zerg. And that's like one thing where I think it can be useful to allow you to express your personality and your playstyle, or your personality through your playstyle, in fact. And it would be really nice if there were many options for that. And that ties back into balance, because when you think about the context of, oh, the game has maybe some weak units or weaker units. Well, if those units are reinforcing a playstyle or a pattern of play that really works in sync with your personality and is really attractive to you specifically, that is something that I think is valuable. And we shouldn't just say, hey, screw this. It's not worth even trying to preserve or whatever. We should actually try to make sure that players have, many different options, because some of them are going to speak to those players. Some of those options will speak to different players in different ways to different degrees. And I think you guys understand where I'm coming from when I say that most RTS games do feel a little one note, right? We think about StarCraft 1. If you don't like siege tanks, then you're never going to like playing Terran and Brood War, because they are such a critical unit. Like maybe you'll like playing TVZ, but siege tanks play a very pivotal part in that, even if you're not mech switching, because you need to be able to do tank pushes and, be able to do even just 2 siege tanks across the map to try to kill the enemy Zerg at a specific timing. That happens all the time at pro level play and on the ladder. And you need to be able to be aware of that, right? So I'm not saying, again, that in Brood War we should have the ability to use only bio and like only one kind of unit. It's more like if the play pattern of sieging up and holding an area doesn't speak to you. I mean, maybe Terran isn't your race in general, but if you want to play a more nimble, fast option, it would be nice if that was available and it was balanced in the sense that it can win games, but it requires different tactics and skills, and it does have a counterplay to it that isn't out of reach for in an even skill matchup. So that's where it comes in. I don't want any individual strategy other than obviously if the strategies are good. If you imagine that you have somehow you have this like weird phantom human person that can do anything evenly in terms of level of execution, right? They can play anything equally well, any style that you put at them. I would like it so that no matter which style they chose, there was play and counterplay for that particular style. And it wasn't overly strong or overly weak. And it was down to the level of execution, whether or not it worked out. That's what I would like. That's sort of what my goal is. So maybe that helps to shed some light on one of the reasons why we'll be doing some of these changes in the first place. And I do think that, tying back to, for example, tier 2.5 and 3.5, removing that tech requirement does potentially run the risk of increasing the number of choices to the point where you might have fatigue or paralyzation, where you feel like, oh, there's too many things for me to pick and I don't know what to choose. But I think if you imagine, one of the things that we have that like kind of counteracts that, right, is if you already have stockades because you were building bio and then you get tier 2, you can add covenants for more advanced tier 2 infantry, right? And then you can choose to add captaincies to support them, or you can go to one of the other branches. So we still delineate it based on branch, and I feel like that will help counteract the choice paralyzation. But also, ideally, you would be able to point to a specific area of the sort of game at any one point and say, hey, I teched up or hey, my opponent is doing something with a certain strategy that I don't actually have the tools to respond to effectively right now. So I have a couple of options. I can pivot to a different tier, or I can maybe increase the number of the same thing that I already have, like, add more stockades or something in the bio example, because that's going to give me the leg up if I just overwhelm them with quantity. Or I can tech up and then use higher tier things to, defeat my opponent or to counter what they're doing. And I think that would be like a healthy situation. And generally we are in that situation where that is sort of the play pattern, but it would be nice to make sure that more and more options are viable if you play the strategies that those units lend themselves towards well. If you are good at locking down an area and keeping it held, then ideally being able to access palladiums and stuff is good. And then maybe you can add cataphracts for like a slow push versus mass units. I'm thinking of like vassal massers, or even like ground armies that have a lot of zealots in them or something. Cataphracts don't have penetration, but they do have multi-target, and they do attack pretty consistently and from a decent range. So you imagine if you have phalanx cataphract or something, then you can do that. Well, making it so that you invest in that a little bit more straightforwardly without requiring a heavy investment in another tier 2.5, like this other tech structure or something, seems like it could improve that particular case as an example. So again, to quickly summarize the changes that will be happening on pre-release at some point soon, I'll be actually doing a dev stream later today. I'm recording this on the 4th of October, and I'll be working on the future, update, future version or whatever, conceptualizing whether to cut 0.5 or, what changes to make to things like the Tinkerer's Tower units out of the captaincy. The Siren will probably be turned into a longer range unit, while the Striga will be something that applies a polyoid adhesive, I think. So that'll be an interesting one because it's like a fire blade instead of whatever plasma type blade it has right now. So, an interesting unit that we unfortunately do lack audio visuals for, particularly visuals, right? It definitely needs a custom model, but eventually we'll get there. So that'll be one thing that I think is kind of interesting. Now, there's a couple of other things that I will be doing, of course. So let's just summarize them like I was saying earlier. We are going to be looking at smoothing out some of the accessing of the scrapyard, where we probably cut the time cost for it, and we think about adjusting the resource costs of the Blackjack and the Matador. I was thinking maybe just drop their mineral cost by 25, and then maybe some nominal changes to their durability as a result. But that might be something to think about. Maybe we can just test with reducing the scrapyard time cost and see where that goes. But that's a later thing. That's something that we'll think about later on. And then aside from that, I think that's probably it for tier 1. For tier 1 Terran, that is. For tier 1 Protoss, we are going to be looking at the Zealot and the Golem, as mentioned previously. Then on the tier 2 Terran side, cutting out 0.5, or just making Tinkerer's Tower available by default. Maybe we don't remove 0.5 immediately on the first day of development for this pre-release update. Either way, though, the Tinkerer's Tower will be adjusted and the units within will be adjusted. Considering rebalancing the Mantle and the Rotary/Commandment units from, assuming we remove 0.5, right? Rebalancing those in terms of their time costs and their resource costs for the add-ons and the structure and stuff. And then on the tier 3 Terran side, we'd be thinking about doing the same thing about 0.5 for the Atelier, just axing that entirely. But then what does that mean for the Nanite Assembly and the add-ons to the Iron Foundry? What do we adjust there? So all of this is still going to result in some pretty significant changes, particularly I think at tier 2. But I think the rest of the game is stable enough that we can pretty comfortably move forward with, video content and tutorials, since we probably know what the significant first and second order consequences are going to be. Or at least we know where we want to go with it. So the intended changes will shine through. Then in the other side of the, other sort of races or whatever, I actually haven't decided if there's Anything in particular that needs adjustment? Obviously, the Cantors is a continuing conversation. Do we end up increasing their transport space size? That'll be something to think about, so that you can only fit one in an envoy. Could very well be the case. On the Zerg side, I'm not 100% sure if anything needs adjustments at this point. I know that some people have been still maintaining that Quasilisks feel pretty awkward to use or, unimpactful. I'm not 100% sure if there would be anything in particular that I would want to change about them. I was debating giving them one extra range so that they'd have the same. I think that would push them at the same range as the Hydra, although they might still be one range down from the Hydra. I'd have to take a look. But that might be something that allows them to have a little bit more impact, particularly versus air units, right? Right now they have 4 range and the Hydra has 5 range. So yeah, that would basically give them parity range in terms of, when they have Hydras involved, which if you want to mix Quasilisks and Hydralisks actually makes it a little bit awkward. The Quasilisk is faster, but the Hydra at that point, I don't know, it would just feel like, oh, I have to, move my Quasis forward so that they can be fodder for the Hydras, because the Hydras are the real damage dealers. But that naturally happens right now due to the ranges. So it would feel a little bit awkward to start mixing them, although I don't know that most people do that anymore. But that's probably the only thing that really comes to mind right about now. And I guess there's always the larger conversation. I know some people aren't super fond of Zerg having access to air units from each one of their tech nodes. That was actually something that Mystery Meat was commenting on recently. But I do think that that's kind of normalized over time as people became aware of it. However, there is, of course, always the open question of, are these units, expensive enough, right? Something that I won't be pushing to release, but was intended to be on release, is that the Nathricor is supposed to be 75 minerals instead of 50. Right now it is 50. The patch note even says it was updated to 75, and it's just something that slipped through the cracks before the tournament. So that's very unfortunate, because obviously Nathricors have already been used. So I can't in good conscience change that, because, playoffs qualifications and map performance and stuff obviously was related to that. Like maybe Enos can't afford as many, Nathricors when he upset Keen in the crazy rush, right? Or maybe I'm sure Nathricors they were used against Veek by 3Crow. Like maybe 3Crow doesn't win that particular match when he 6-pooled Veek if they're more expensive, right? There's all these like questions that you have to ask. So I'm not going to change it now. It's just how it is. But that is something that was intended to be pushed through. And that's an example of us acknowledging the power of these early tier units. It does put them in a bit of an awkward position, because early air units, they can scout a lot easier. They can obviously harass and force anti-air defenses up, like Watchdogs, Spraith colonies, or Cesians as they are now, Wardens, all this other stuff. You force defenses into certain areas. I think people are getting better at knowing when it's a good time to build units and defend with those versus building static defense. Particularly as Zerg, you actually want to prevent doing that for a very long time, unless you actually know that they're 6-pooling me, but they are mining gas. Okay, well in that case I should probably throw down a Spraith super early, because it's unlikely that I can respond to that in time with any actual units. But generally speaking, if you're in a position as Zerg, you don't want to be parting ways with your active workers. You also don't really want to be training military units in the early game anyway, if you can avoid it, because you want to scale up, unless you're looking to actually punish a timing or something. But that's a separate conversation. That's just how Zerg are, right? So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. We're pushing things in an interesting direction, and the meta is developing in an interesting direction, where I feel like even if something is a little overtuned or imba, you could say, people are responding to it and learning how to make it less impactful than it initially seems. And therefore, maybe it isn't actually really imba in that sense. So there's always that thing that I go back to, is if the players themselves play the game and they find a response to something without me having to do a balance change, isn't that great? Isn't that actually what we really want? So again, to remind people, eventually we want to stop patching and updating CMBW in terms of balance changes. We want to be able to add more content in the future or whatever, but we're not interested in, introducing new units after a certain point, maybe for factions or something, but not for the melee game. We're not interested in balance tweaking. We would add new maps, and we would think about, we would continue to have a conversation about, do balance changes need to be made? But ideally there would be healthy debate and discussion over this. There's been an increase in people hanging out in voice chat just randomly on the server, mostly because I end up joining there when I'm on a walk. I call it my dumb phone poster time, because I really like the dumb phone poster meme from 4chan, or whatever you want to call it. It's like a slogan. So Anyway, that's something that I appreciate for whatever reason. And so I look at that and I think, yeah, it's time for dumb phone poster time. And we talk about game balance, we talk about like features and stuff. And sometimes something will come up where, say, Balethal will be hanging out and he'll comment that, oh, I'm pretty sure this unit is powerful or busted or something, or was busted in the past or something like that. And then maybe the Shambler will be there and he'll say, oh, I'm not sure about that. Like they were talking about the old Atreus recently. And it's kind of interesting. Like, the Shambler was saying that the new Atreus is not very good, but Balethal was commenting how he thought it was really good. And obviously these are players of different calibers, but ideally we would get to the point where that kind of conversation can happen all over. Maybe not about the whether a unit is good, but whether something is OP. It's like somebody might say, this is really powerful, this is broken. And then somebody else might say, well, I disagree, actually. And then maybe the results of that even bear out that it's like sometimes it ends up being really impactful and sometimes it can be, countered, and it's in a healthy sense and it's not in a bad sense where you have to build this exact unit to counter that exact unit or something stupid like that. I wouldn't want to call and response hard counter system, obviously. But I hope that you've enjoyed this little insight into how we're conceptualizing certain changes and improvements, the methodology behind wanting to, or the motivation behind the changes and where we want to go with CMBW. Eventually we do indeed want to leave balance changes in the past and say, okay, we're done. Like the game is finished, so to speak. We can move on to other things. But yes, and of course, those are also some of the changes that we plan to ship in the next pre-release update, and improvements that we have already shipped, like the middle mouse button scroll and the lobby sound when you join the lobby. Lovely stuff. Sip time is now over, so let's talk about video content plans. So I did release the Ascension explainer video today, and it's pretty good. It covers the format. It talks about all the things that you would need to know. I don't think that it'll find as much viewership or whatever as like the micro video or anything like that. It's a little bit more on the side of, I guess, like, here's some information about a format. Like, it's not something that you would necessarily get a lot of viewership on. It's not like, look at our epic mod. It's more like, here's the details on this epic tournament. If you're going to play in it or watch it, you now know more about the format. But it was an important video to make nonetheless. And now I can set my sights on setting up videos for the future of the project, like obviously the Terran, Zerg, and Protoss crash courses, or Terran, Protoss, Zerg, I should say. That'll be the order anyway. Zerg mains BTFO, their favorite race, is not going to be discussed until last. Can you believe it? But let's talk about the other content that I want to do. So it's not just that there's plans to do these crash courses. Obviously, I did talk about in the previous podcast that there's plans for roster profiles, plans for a primer video that's just going to be, default or whatever, like a sort of an overview of the whole project and what our goals are and what you can expect. And I think that those are, fairly sensible ones. We have been continuing with castovers on a pretty good regular pace. But I should also mention within this section that there's now a community effort spearheaded by Three Crow himself to have both ranked and casual ladder, where the casual ladder is essentially on maps that are non-standard or work in progress, and between whoever wants to play. And so there's no restrictions on rank or class or whatever. And then the ranked side is, you have to be in the same class. Right now we have class 1 and class 2. Class 1 is currently just, you could say the high performers that have proven themselves, right? That's Mystery Meat, Shambler, and Nablime. Meanwhile, class 2 is a lot more open, right? We've got all sorts of players in class 2 that would be, eligible for ranked in that sense. That's like people like from Three Crow to DF to Inaz to Roller Skates. There's many, many more names in that list. And then as we get people who are able to more regularly and reliably take games off of the class 1s, you might see them move up to class 1 in that sense from class 2. But if you guys have ever played a game that has a ranked ladder and it has like skill groups within a broad rank. So there's like your broad rank might be, for example, silver or gold, but your specific rank might be like Division 1 or Division 2. So we have the same thing here where we have divisions, and we will have 3 divisions. So there's basically Division 2 is where everybody starts. And as long as you maintain somewhere between a 41% and 59% win rate, you'll remain at Division 2. But if you dip below 40%, you're going to go down to Division 3. And if you go to 61% or more, or 60% or more, that's when you're going to get Division 1, because you're winning the majority of your games versus, Division 3 loses the majority. And the reason why this is cool and significant is because even though right now we have to manually submit these outcomes and manually tally them, that's something that 3Crow is helping people out with. And really, again, he's spearheading the initiative, so he deserves a shout out for that. Has a cool looking spreadsheet. You can even like sort by victories or like by player and say like, oh, this player has, 5 games on the casual ladder, and I can see all of their outcomes. And if there's a video link to them or something. He's also starting up his own castovers. I'm going to help him set up his windowed mode and his or CNC draw or whatever if he wants to play full screen, and help him set up his OBS and his stuff to improve the quality of those so that he can just focus on doing the actual commentary. But it's pretty cool to have somebody else doing castovers other than myself and occasionally Mesk, and those are going up on his own channel, so I'll leave a link to that channel in the description of this video if you want to toss him a subscription and hang out there and see what other videos he has planned. But yeah, right now he seems to be pretty gung-ho about it, so do appreciate that. And yeah, he's been making his own kinds of content as a result of that. And not only is he doing castovers, but he's also, again, trying to make sure that everybody can understand the format of how to submit stuff and all that. And that's great. The other thing that should be mentioned too is that the bulk of what I'm going to be focusing on for sure when it comes to any sort of, feature like that where it's a community initiative, I just want to make sure that people can, be a little bit more rewarded for competitive play, even if it's not in a tournament setting, particularly with tournaments now getting to a point where they're probably going to be a little bit less frequent. And we'll talk about that in the next point, like I said earlier. But the reason for the ranked stuff is pretty cool because it basically lets you imagine a world where the ranked season has a prize pool separate from the tournaments, and maybe the season prize pool as we currently have it and season points and all of that stuff will probably be handled in that sense where it's like, okay, right now we have a $225 prize purse because the people in this community are legendary and have sent that much money in. None of that is my money, by the way. That's all you guys. So I do appreciate it. Maybe I'll bump it up at the very end with some of my own money. That's not, outside the equation, right? It's not outside the realm of possibility for sure. But right now it's all just the homies, and I do appreciate that very much. But that's currently earmarked for this round of Ascension tournaments. You can imagine that in the future, we might see people, competing in the ranked ladder for those points because that's the prize money. And then the tournaments themselves have their own dedicated, prize purse or whatever, where maybe it's even just something as simple as it being like $50, but like total or whatever, and distributed amongst like maybe the grand prize is 30, and then like second place gets 10, and the third and fourth get 5 or something like that, right? That would be a total of 50. So something like that could feasibly happen. And if that's like once a month thing, then you could imagine people doing that. They would be pretty compelled to do that in that sense, I think. But anyway, like even if it's just for a little bit of money, it's still something, and you would get it a lot faster because it would be just for that one tournament. So as soon as that tournament's over, you get your money, like same day or whatever as the grand finals take place, or are casted, I guess. So yeah, that's pretty good. I think that could very well be something that we switch to for the format, because it is a little awkward to be like, we got prize money, and then people are like, but I have to wait until December or something. I won in September though, mystery meet or whatever. So that is a little weird. That's a little awkward, but we'll get there. Like I said, we're looking like things are looking pretty good. I'm pleased to see more and more people check out the project. And I feel like the ranked ladder and the casual ladder are ways just to improve the general state of things, right? It's like, oh, there's a ladder. Oh, there's money associated with the ladder. That could very well happen. So anyway, just thought it would be worth pointing that out. And I guess we can finally talk about the schedule for Ascension 5 and tournament frequency. So yeah, definitely something that I'm aware of right now is Ascension 5's playoffs look like we will not actually have the final setup here for the first round matches, which is just the 4 quarterfinals. And again, after this, we have 10 more matches to play. We won't have that until Saturday, this coming Saturday, which is a week after groups. And if you imagine that it takes us, 2 weeks, 1 week to play, one Saturday to play groups, one Saturday to do round 1 matches, and maybe hopefully we can do like soon after that, you could imagine the second matches being played, right? The lower bracket matches or something being played. If we could do something like that, that would be solid, because that would be just one less thing for us to worry about in terms of timing. But even then, we might take a third week to take care of the next set of matches all the way into the grand final. So if that's going to be the case as a general setup because of people's availability, I want to stick with the double elim format. We might have to renege on that and go to a single elim one if we want more consistent timings, like maybe it's every third week instead of every 2 weeks. But it might be more convenient to just do once a month we have a tournament. And again, maybe if we have it be prized, people will be more likely to, instead of the prizes happening way later, maybe the prize money hits in every single individual tournament, and then we have more people willing to spend more time out of their day or find a time to do it earlier or something. Because I don't think it's tenable to do I don't know if it's really reasonable for fans who are watching at home to follow the storylines of a tournament that takes 3 weeks to play, 14 matches plus group stage. That does sound like a really long amount of time, and especially if it's like a week between sets of games, I think it would be really hard to maintain the stakes and all of that stuff over time. It would seem a lot. So I'm thinking based on that, we probably will be dropping down in tournament frequency, but trying to make sure that our existing ones are run a little bit more smoothly and, as good as they can be. And Ascension 5 is kind of a test run for that. It's the first time doing double elimination. Maybe it ends up being like, oh, we can't handle that. Because of people's availabilities and schedules, we just have to do single elim instead because it's the only way to make it make sense. But that being said, it's just one of those things where we've got to figure it out, right? So let's see where it goes. I'm not making any actual changes yet, but that could be something that we do. Is maybe it just makes sense to do it once a month. That way, I'm not spending so much time on educational videos and mapping pool and tournament stuff and game design. All with this idea that it's like every 2 weeks, because I haven't gone back and worked on things like the tutorials in a while. And it's because I haven't really been able to, since I've been busy with everything else that it goes into the tournament planning and adminning and all this other stuff. So as as the community gets bigger, we're going to have some of that responsibility offloaded a little bit, actually. Obviously, the Ascension Explainer video can be consulted for people to know how the playoffs format works. And then you could say that like certain people like Inozlix and probably Pr0totype for that matter have already volunteered to do refereeing for matches, which means that we'll have somebody available for, being able to basically play through the witness mode, right? The observing of those matches, and then also be adminning that particular match so that we don't have to catch it live, so we can cast it from a replay, right? I think that would be great if we could make that happen. So it looks like right now, going back to the schedule, right? Right now we're not sure about the first quarterfinal is Mystery Meet against DF. So that will be taking place. Dun 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 dun. Drum roll. That'll be taking place on the 6th, which is Friday. That will be at 3:00 Eastern time, and we still do need a referee for that, but I think Enos said that he's available for that. So we'll see how that one goes. The second quarterfinal was supposed to be between Keen and Veek, but I think Veek is going to be ceding that ground because of availability. So in that case, 3Crow would be next in line. So he'll get yet another opportunity at playing at Ascension 5, which is pretty funny. He won't get just like the last time when Biddy B gave him the spot in the semifinals for Ascension 4 due to scheduling issues. 3Crow will not receive a season point for, qualifying by default, basically, because he didn't actually qualify. He was just given the spot. So if he just chooses to accept it, the thing that he'll be able to do is if he can score wins and in playoffs, like he'll still be awarded season points based on that. It's not like the points go to Veek or something, but he won't just get a point by default for that, right? So we'll see how that one goes. But man, this guy's, I mean, he's unlucky because he wasn't able to actually, win against VDB in the first place or qualify out of that group in Ascension 5. But he's also had a lot of opportunities where people are just like, oh, I can't make it. Here you go, 3Crow. So that's kind of funny. We'll see about that one, but that one is also not yet scheduled. That's the only match we don't have a time for. On the 5th, which is Thursday, obviously tomorrow, as of the time of recording this, although it's today if you're listening to this when it came out, or when it comes out, Niblime and BiddyB will be taking each other on, and that will be taking place at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I think Enos said he's available for that as well, so we'll see how that one goes. I have to make sure that Enos has like a good setup for actually recording the match so that it can be broadcast worthy. So I'm gonna work with anybody who's interested in signing up as a referee or a refraudee, as I've currently called them on the Discord server, because that's the role so that people can ping it. If you are going to be a match referee, then I will work with you to make sure that you can capture the game in a fidelity that is, good enough for me to be able to cast from that, right? So it'll be like the proper sample rate and stuff, and you can ideally be able to send me the video directly instead of me having to watch it off of YouTube. That would be the ideal scenario. So I'll work, we'll figure that out, and that's only if we absolutely need it to begin with, because ideally the replays will just work. So there you go. And then the last quarterfinal will actually be casted live because it's with Scholar, and Scholar is famous for having his replays bug out, and only him. I've never seen anybody else do it. I think it's down to his network. And that will be the Shambler against Scholar, and that will be happening Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern. That is, of course, October 7th. So there you go. You guys can enjoy that. The schedule is always in the thread for the playoffs, which is in the Discord server. So you can check that out too if you're interested in maybe what time Keen will be taking on 3Crow. That's going to be an interesting matchup if 3Crow is going to take that spot because he's playing random. Keen is still very new to the project. I just imagine that being an absolute fucking, an interesting one, right? Keen is so far ahead in terms of base mechanics of the RTS, but he's so far behind 3Crow in understanding. Like, the cheese could be off the wall here. And I guess maybe in that case, Keen might be grateful that it's double a limb. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And I guess just to remind you, you get half a season point for winning a lower bracket game as opposed to winning a top game, like an upper bracket game. So... and we will round up at the end of the season if somebody has 0.5. So no worries there. All right, that covers the discussion of Ascension 5, and it's now time to talk about Cosmonarchy Brood War content plans. That is not video content, that's just actual content, right? Tutorials and campaigns. One of the reasons why I called this one the Wild Worlds is because obviously, and I chose this as the backdrop. This organ tile type was actually created as part of a campaign called To Touch the Sun. I was working on a map, and I was working on the campaign, and I was thinking, it'd be really cool if you could actually have a mission that takes place like on in one of these orbital hives. It would make sense for you to, lay a strike on that and try to, take over the area and defeat the Zerg there and, set up enough explosives to blow it up or whatever, like that being the sort of reason you're there. So of course we should have something like that, right? So it always made sense for there to be that kind of tile type, but we didn't have it. So I started making it, and I haven't really made significant progress on it since then. On and off here and there, I've done some work and improved it. But at the end of the day, ultimately, we are looking at something that does need some more work, and way more variance is the main thing. There's not very many variants. I've got I think I have 2 inner corners, 2 north-facing cliffs, 3 south-facing cliffs, although 2 of them are normal and one of them is kind of like specialty, like one of the low percentage variants that you would get. And then I've got 2 outer corners as well. So we need like at least, ideally you have like 10 of each, but minimum would be like 5, right? And I would, the more we can make, the better, because this is an organic tile type. So the more that you have, the more organic it's going to look. It's not like, metal walls or something where you can maybe skimp on the variants because you only need a few and it's fine if they repeat. Ideally, they should all look pretty distinct from each other. So anyway, all that to be said, we're going to need ramps, by the way. That's another thing that we have to deal with. That'll be something. I'm just hand painting this stuff, basically, using the clone tool based on different Zerg samples, be it rubble or, stuff from the structures. And then I obviously discolor it a lot and, try to make it seem very distinct from the units and stuff. And the source tile, like the baseline tile, is flesh tile from Balethal, which also needs some work, particularly to make sure that it works well with the palette, but also it needs like way more variance and it needs doodads and all this other stuff, right? So we're getting there, or we're going to get there eventually when it comes to building out something like that. That is not exactly a primary, requirement for me. It's not like this tile type is necessary for the Zerg tutorial right now, for example. Although I would love for the Zerg tutorial to feature that, or like a Zerg campaign to feature that prominently. It's not like something that I'm counting on or requiring for that particular purpose. But I am definitely thinking that like that helps immediately. Any sort of significantly custom tiles like that, especially something so high concept, is going to help set the project apart and make you feel like, holy shit, this is epic. So I do want to create that kind of environment and create that kind of, inspire that kind of reaction out of people. Holy shit, this is epic. And I want to make first party tutorial content and campaign content because we do have campaigns or a campaign from None of the Realm. It's a short Terran campaign. It's, fairly good for introducing the Terran arsenal and stuff. But ultimately, it is still set in the old world, right? It's set in the classic setting. And I commented on this in the last episode. It's like, as I do really genuinely appreciate having campaign content for people to play, because I think it's a very useful thing so that people can check it out and then experience it and see it's fully voice acted. Oh, it's all this. Oh, it's that. But at the end of the day, it is ultimately something that needs, to be adapted, right? We need a version. We need some campaigns that are our own work, essentially. That's what it comes down to. And we don't yet have that. We need campaigns that are set in our own worlds, and we don't yet have that. So I would absolutely like to stress some development on that. Maybe go back to working on Day of Blood, which is a 6-mission Terran campaign. The first mission is already, sort of like solid in terms of its layout. Its script was started. I think it might be pretty close to completion, actually. So like I could probably get that up and running and then just have that be available as a mission to play while I work out the kinks with the AI and stuff, but like plug in the transmissions and all that. The Terran tutorial is in a similar boat. I want to redo the voice acting that I did for that. But aside from that, the script is in a state where I can consider it done for now and absolutely can continue working on figuring out what other events might need to be commented on or have dialogue events for. And eventually, if even if I update it with patchwork stuff, like, I added a couple more transmissions in this update to it, eventually I can go back and redo the whole thing in terms of voice acting so it sounds more standard, because you're probably never going to get the exact same result. Like if you were trying to be, a character, I mean, that's not exactly true, because I did that for Inconsummate, where I did the voice acting for like one particular character, but I did it like, okay, the first 3 missions I did all in one take, and then like mission 4 I did in a separate take, and then 5 was in a separate take, and 6 was in a separate take. I've said this before about mission 6, where I had like tooth pain that I had to get checked out, and I had like an appointment coming up or whatever, but I did the voice acting for that anyway for mission 6 of Inconsummate for Gaska, and I think the other ones had already been done or something. So for some reason I didn't have the same issue, but like you can kind of hear that Gaska sounds pained or whatever. Like there's some weirdness with the way that he's speaking. But it ended up working out fine because he had just recovered from the Overmind dying. So that was sort of like a funny built-in thing that like, it turns out it didn't matter that there was like, for me anyway, I can obviously hear that like when I'm delivering those lines, I have a slight, maybe not a lisp, but some kind of weirdness with my mouth that influences pronunciation and does make it sound like I'm in pain a little bit. Like it does come through a little bit, which ended up working out just fine. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that like, if you want it to sound picture perfect each time or whatever, then you do need to do it all in one go. Although maybe there's something to be said about like art imitating life, in that if you are in the first mission, like that's taking place some hours before the second mission or something, right? And so maybe you should have a break and like the next day record the second one or something, so that it does sound a little bit different, like you're maybe a little bit refreshed, or maybe you're weary, like maybe you recorded at the end of the night or something after you're a bit tired, and it's like, we're still going, we're still kicking. I don't know, there's something like that where you instead of trying to fake that through intonation and inflection, you might just fucking do that, like have it be real. So there's always, something to think about there anyway, when it comes to voice acting. But for sure, when it comes to the tutorials, when it came to stuff in the past for voice acting, usually my policy was record everything at once, because that minimizes the chances that, particularly if you're doing a lot of the voice acting yourself, even of different characters, it minimizes the chance that like you bleed into like one character sounds too much like the other or whatever. I think in general, that's probably not a huge issue. Particularly when it comes to like really big productions, you're not going to have the option to have everything done in one take. You just logistically can't speak that much in one day. Although I make it sound hard because I talk all the time. So yeah, there's absolutely going to be a refocus on the tutorials and the campaign content because I just think we do need that. I haven't forgotten about the casual players who are, or the more PvAI players or whatever in my quest to court the more competitive side of the RTS world. I absolutely think that campaigns are going to be a big deal, and it would be lovely to be able to message people who make videos mostly of campaign content and check those out. I know recently we had a streamer. He's kind of like a variety streamer, but right now he's playing through a custom campaign. It's one of those like StarCraft reversed things where they like sort of like alternate or whatever, where they flip the perspective, I think is what happens. I don't know. It's like one of those projects that's basically like that. But it's like yet another version of that. And then beyond that, there's so yeah, that guy's name is Calder, is a call sign or his tag, and he's been streaming that. But he actually, it's funny. He streams like he streams like some kind of sniper map that helps you like train micro with basically it's like Osu but StarCraft is how I would describe it. And it's interesting because he like tries to get his APM. He seems to be like taking it somewhat seriously as far as like being able to play not competitively per se, but like be able to play well. And that's the kind of market we're looking for. Like, okay, that guy can probably pop in and do some work. So he said he's going to check CMBW out when he's not in the middle of another StarCraft thing, because he's rightly assumed or figured out that it's very expansive. It's very vast. It will require some some dedication to learn about. And it would be great if by the time he ends up finding time to do that, we have more tutorials and more campaign content and stuff. At the very least, I would like to have more scenarios and maybe ideally have voice acting for those scenarios and stuff. We'll see about how that one works out, but absolutely something that I'm still paying attention to, and we will need to do some AI improvements as a result. All right, it's the time you've all been waiting for. Now I'm going to discuss non-RTS game development and world building content. But first, I have to sip. So it's definitely been a while since we've done any streams about Xibalba development or Onatar development or Pangea development. I don't think we ever did Pangea development publicly. But yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. So I wanted to say that I will be making a noticeable public effort to make development, do development streams or sessions or whatever that are publicly available. I mean, they might be unlisted to reduce clutter on the channel, but there's going to be a playlist that you can follow and stuff for whatever my next course of action is. It will probably be one of these pre-existing worlds where we have, say it could be Pangea, Onatar, Xibalba. I will be working on, streams where I do this kind of thing when it comes to the world building. These could be tech maps in the RTS sense, could be game design documentation, planning some other non-RTS game, but it will be set in one of these worlds, one of these wild worlds that I've made. And I'm not 100% sure what it'll be. I just know it won't be an RTS. So there's been a couple of things that I've been thinking about related to that. And, you could go the Unreal route where you try to do something like build out probably a low poly, I guess is what you would call it. It's like, something like what we've got for the hook up some kind of rendering pipeline into Unreal with the assets that we have, and it would be like top down, or it would be isometric perspective, and it might be like a tactical game or something in there. Maybe it could be turn based. Maybe it could be. I was thinking of even a tower defense potentially. Although I was also thinking you could probably use Antikythera as it currently is to make a tower defense, because we do have triggers essentially that order units around, and we do have building placement, and we have all this and general unit movement and stuff. So like it could even be possible to do there. But anyway, the main idea is that I would take this up as a solo effort. It wouldn't be eating up an insane amount of time out of CMBW development, which is still what my current focus is, but it would allow me to start get the ball rolling on some of those things, bring these worlds to life. Another option to separate myself from Unreal entirely is to maybe do something in like the build engine or something like that, where one of these old boomer shooter engines. I was looking back at Ion Fury and thinking of Hedon and some of these other games that I've played that are a bit more on the modern side in terms of release date, but have essentially made peace with certain limitations of the build engine and stuff like the build engine, and said, all right, let's just make a game like this. And I think it would be quite feasible to basically create something like that, but with that level of visual fidelity, but for the Xibalba universe or the Onatar setting or whatever. And I think it would be really interesting to think about stuff like that. If I was, that's not really the same thing as like making your own game in some ways, because it is kind of like modding, but you can release the end result, as far as I know anyway. And I do have some connections in this space, right? I have Dynamo, and there's actually, is his name Doom Fan or something like that? There's some people in the server that are knowledgeable about those old school FPS games and stuff. I know Night of the Realm has played a decent amount. I know Fagudo has played a decent amount. So there would be interest, I think, if I went this route, and maybe that's even the most feasible route for me to go, as opposed to going the Unreal route, because that does require this whole graphics pipeline solution. And if I'm going to be trying to release games that are available for purchase, I can't just be like ripping assets from anywhere, like what Mesk is doing with his private project for obviously Apex X. Now, when I'm thinking about something like making a shooter or making a tactical turn-based game or whatever, I have a lot of ideas that are very different than what is out there. I have not played an FPS game that is in the style that I would make in the kind of build engine style, like a boomer shooter. I've not played a boomer shooter that's quite like how I would make it. Certainly there's things that I would take inspiration from or say were interesting or cool. I definitely think that, for example, in Ion Fury, this goes to show that maybe I'm not the most knowledgeable about the features, but the fact that headshots were doing bonus damage seems like something I would absolutely port in, like having weak spots on the enemies. I don't know if that was a thing in the original Doom, or anything that was like that. Maybe it was something in Duke Nukem. It's hard for me to remember. I just remember like some really ugly environments in Duke Nukem. That's pretty much it. But yeah, basically having the idea to go down that route seems like, there's certainly things that I would say, okay, this is something I would have in my game, but I would have, way more monsters than they would ever have. I'd have way more enemies and stuff. And, you might even carry over things like the upgrade system, right? It's like the Madcap or the Maverick into the Madcap, right? It's like, well, they both use similar weaponry. So in the idea of, if you were to port that concept to some Onatar or Xibalba or Pangea boomer shooter, suddenly you have, now there's a tier 1 rifle guy and a tier 2 rifle guy, and they both give you rifle ammo. And it's like, okay, great. So I might not need to balloon the arsenal of weaponry in that sense for the player, because that could lead to choice paralysis. But I might also even go a route where I think to myself, like, maybe instead of having infinite weapon selection, maybe you have to choose between archetypes. Like there's a, kinetic weapon, and that might be your standard issue rifle. And you might, instead of it being something where it's like one is clearly an upgrade over the other, it's more down to play style. But like one of them uses rifle ammo, and then one of them uses plasma ammo, and then one of them uses some other kind of ammo. And so you'd pick between archetypes, and maybe there'd be like a locker you could choose to update your loadout from or something from any given time. So there's definitely ideas there. I'm also kind of partial to the idea of what Halo has, where they have scavenging for ammo, but they also have scavenging for weapons, because you only have 2 weapons that you can equip. I might make it more generous than that. Maybe you have 2 like heavy weapons you can equip, and then a pistol, or like 2 secondary weapons that are like smaller or something. I guess kind of like Gears of War, but if you had like more flexibility with utility, which would be like the grenades and stuff. So yeah, there's definitely something like that would be pretty neat to maybe explore with. I know that's like counter to a lot of how, for example, the original Doom worked and stuff. But there's definitely things that I've been thinking about when it comes to that. And I think I could probably privately get started on some of these things, setting up Unreal for the tactical stuff, or setting up the build engine or whatever other engine is good based on Dynamo's recommendation and other people. And think about how I'm going to plug in certain changes to the graphics, or think about what kinds of features I'm going to add, and how I'm going to set up a graphical pipeline in the first place, and what assets I'm going to reuse and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm definitely somebody who thinks that there's a healthy amount of potential in building a game without needing to program an engine from scratch, that I think it would make some sense to go for something like the build engine, your boomer shooter solution, or maybe even the Unreal solution, depending on, what all I actually need. And there's probably a lot of resources for learning and self-tutoring and all that. And at the very least, you guys will get some streams where I work on the worlds for these publicly. And that's just because I feel like there's a number of people who have been signed on to the club, mostly for our original games or content and our original plans. And I would hate to make them feel like they've been left behind because we've been focused so heavily on CMBW as a testbed for our game design ideas. Although there's also been, CMBW campaign content will also be a testbed for our storytelling ideas. So it's not only game design stuff. But at the same time, I can't realistically build an RTS without personally going into, a 2 years sequence of learning how to program an engine and then building my own version of Antikythera. And Veek is not currently available to do too much work on a steady pace. Maybe that'll change. And I'm not sure that even if he was available, would he want to spend his limited time working on TNFC stuff, or would he want to work on his own stuff? We haven't really discussed that yet. So there's still a lot to consider when it comes to that sort of thing. But definitely something that we, rather than just sit here and wait and hope that Veek somehow gets a lot of availability and then chooses to use that availability on, the work that I want to do, it would be nice if I could take my destiny into my own hands here a little bit and go the solo route, sort of like the solo podcast, right? So, and I say solo, I mean, it wouldn't really be solo. I'm sure people like DF and Solstice might chip in when it comes to that or be interested in following along or, contributing a little bit of their stuff. And who knows what other, I was talking about using Dynamo as a resource for the build engine games. I'm sure he would be down to talk about that because we're pretty amiable people. And I'm sure he'd be interested, in fact, in like, oh, this guy had a lot of novel RTS ideas. I wonder what he's going to do in this environment or something. Like maybe on that front, just on the, there would be some reason and incentive for him to check it out and contribute. So we'll see. Well, basically is what the end result of all of that is. But I think it's worth pointing out and worth talking about because I think building out the worlds is great. And building out the plans for RTS campaigns or tech trees is great, but also starting some non-RTS game development. I mean, eventually we wanted to make shooters anyway, so I'll get some practice with that now and see what works. Or maybe it'll be a tactical game instead, like I guess like XCOM or something. Although I hate those games, something like that, right? Who knows what'll happen? But I know what happens next. It's the coffee questions. So if you're a fan of our work, you can contribute to our 3 pool, our amount of money that we have at disposal. You can send money in neat increments of 3 by going to Pr0totype and Veek 7. The coffee page for that is in the description. So check it out. I guess I should probably make like a redirect page where you can go to like fraudsclub.com/support and it would just redirect you there. That would be an easier fucking link to put on than the coffee page, TBH. But anyway, that's a separate thing for sure. Let's talk about these questions. Myrian asks, do you plan to stick with unit archetypes present in CMBW, or will more exotic types be seen? And he gives examples like mobile platforms and factories, units capable of climbing terrain, etc. So I would say that unit archetypes present in CMBW will definitely be the baseline, but they will probably not be the only thing. I mean, this question was specifically about Pangea, which is our code name for the lower scale RTS game that we were going to make before Onatar. Again, based on the last subject before the coffee question started, we aren't exactly sure what's going on there. But I'll answer it broadly by saying that when it comes to any RTS that I would make, there are things that I would want to change about Brood War's formula that would absolutely change what you would potentially do with unit archetypes or unit designs. And one of those things is, I've talked about this so many times, air units do not have actual pathing and collision in StarCraft 1 or StarCraft 2 for that matter, but we're thinking of StarCraft 1 here. I want air units that actually have to path around each other if they're on the same plane, which basically means that if you have fighters, then they would fly, maybe elevated in terms of Z above something like a flagship, like a capital ship or something. And that's just for sorting. So you can see the fighters above the capital ship. I guess like in theory, you'd have the inverted where the heavy craft would be further up or something, right? But either way, it's like, okay, the fighters can fly under or over the capital ship, but they can't fly through other fighters. That doesn't make any fucking sense. So let's instead I mean, I know, like, in theory, all the air units are supposedly flying above and below each other or whatever. Is sort of like that's how you're supposed to read it or see it. In StarCraft 2, it's really funny because it's obviously a 3D game, but they just like allow the units to clump up and then they just spit each other out, which is definitely not how it would really work in practice, but whatever. So then we obviously have, workers also don't have collision. So I would ideally like to target both of these things, but at the very least, I would like to get rid of air unit pathing and stuff. So, or get rid of the fact that they don't have pathing and collision. So add that as a thing that they have. I think that just makes a lot of sense. So when we make a change that's like that, suddenly you probably don't see as much splash damage because it becomes less impactful, generally speaking. And so you would probably see less splashers, and the ones that would have splash would have it in, more impactful ways. Like the line traces would be cut down. The splash areas that you do see would probably be wider. So you think about like the phalanx, you might have like wider splash radius and something that in the Pangea version of the phalanx in siege mode. If we had something that had that kind of weapon, it would splash for wider because the point would be that it would be doing, splash is more impactful when it exists because it's not as common. That sort of thing. So that's like one example of how the archetypal design or whatever, the archetypal design would change from CMBW to something in our own engine where we have more control over things like that. We can actually make the game function with air units pathing around each other. So hopefully that's like one example that immediately springs to mind anyway. But when it comes to like exotic unit archetypes, which I think is probably the bigger thrust of the question, I definitely think that there's certain designs that I've had in CMBW that I haven't been able to deliver upon or actually implement at all. Like one of my favorite unit concepts from back in the day was the Mortothra Core, or not the Mortothra Core, the Malkothra. Was it Malkothra Core? I'm blanking on the name now and I have to go and look at it because it's been so long. But there was a unit that I came up with a long time ago. Yeah, the Malkothra Core. And it's basically this, it's hidden on the website now, so you can't find it. But it's basically this giant Zerg tunneling worm. And the head of it is the main unit. And then you can gestate segments by spending resources. And those segments follow the head around. And so they have to follow the head. The head can tunnel into underneath terrain and then burrow up to emerge if it wants to, or just carve a path through the location, which I don't know how the fuck you would even implement in something like that in Brood War. And then also like the heads are supposed to follow it, or the segments are supposed to follow it, but that's not all. You're supposed to be able to build buildings and gestate structures like Cesients and stuff on top of the on top of the Malkothra Core segments. So it's like, okay, these segments are following the leader. And then if the head blows up, the segments are dead. Right. But like there was some idea that maybe you could gestate, you could take another Malkothra Core and then bind it to the existing ones if like the segments were blown up and idle. And then the segments themselves also, like you could sever the connection between it. So if you had like 6 segments because you grew really large with a single Malkothra Core, like if you cut it in half or whatever, you destroyed like the 3rd segment, then there'd be, the 2 segments from the front and then the 3 other segments from the back that would be stuck. Because you need to redo the connection or whatever. Like that's an example of a super exotic, epic unit that has all of this complexity associated with it, but actually implementing it is like, what the fuck? And I also don't even know if that exact rendition of the unit that I just described would even be that useful or interesting or compelling to use. Or, it would look great in a trailer or something, but I don't know if you would actually be able to use it as I was intending. So it's probable that the concept would need to be adjusted. I think maybe like, when you right click onto a cliff, that's when it would just choose to, go through the cliff. And then if you right clicked into pathable terrain, it would unburrow on the cliff or something. But like more likely in Brood War, the version in Brood War just wouldn't be able to do that. And maybe you'd be able to implement like the segment stuff, but then like for the segments, how do you, implement being able to build on top of it? Do you have to drop a worker with a transport on it? That doesn't sound right. Maybe you could use Gosvaleth for that, I guess, right? So like maybe that's the answer. But then it's like moving. I think you would instead, more likely the Brood War version would have like the segments would be able to, like you'd push a button to gestate a Cesient onto it. Or maybe the segments would come with a Kagran Cesient, and then you'd be able to mutate that Cesient separately or something. But like, if you destroy the Cesient, do you also destroy the segment, or what? Is it like a new unit? Is it a hard, like we don't have hard points and turret support and stuff in Brood War in the same way that we would want. So that's another thing that you don't usually see is like turreted units that like you can't see any units that are like that where you can actually destroy the turrets separate from the body. Like imagine if you could take this bad boy Goliath that we have here and you could blow up the turret and then, if a Mason repairs it, it can like reconstruct the turret or something. That kind of thing doesn't exist in Brood War because you can't really do it. I mean, you probably could if you tried really hard, but it's not something that currently is doable. So that's an example of like an exotic unit type, the Malkothra Core. But also I'm thinking about the other kinds of things that I'd like to be able to do if we had hardpoint access and all this other stuff. One of the other examples that was given was obviously mobile production or units that can scale cliffs easily and stuff. I mean, I guess the Malkothra Core was supposed to be able to do that, so it's funny. But generally speaking, I would say that like units are going to do that in the same way that like the NCV Waylay is supposed to do it, where they can like jump over terrain and stuff like that. I think that's really neat. So yeah, there's definitely options for stuff like that in the future. You can absolutely expect really interesting unit types, especially the longer the tiers go. Even in our first game, we're still going to have 3 tiers of tech. We're probably going to have something approaching CMBW's unit counts. So at least that's the current plan. So you would absolutely see like, really interesting, crazy stuff. Like if you pitched the unit concept of the Diadem or the Magnetar or the Star Sovereign or the Sovroleth or any of these other units that are like, very powerful, very high concept, that would seem very exotic to somebody who's never played CMBW or seen it or whatever. So that's like an example of like, we can have the same level of power present and a level of, I would say like, it's almost like conceptual budget. There isn't really a conceptual budget, but if you make everything super epic, then it kind of devalues it. Like you definitely need units that are not as epic, that are just basic bitch, Maverick type units or whatever, for the purpose of making it so that your actual epic concepts are actually epic, right? And they really stand apart. So you can expect stuff like that on that level of power and interest and conceptual. What would we say? Yeah, just conceptual power, I guess, conceptual gravitas. You can expect that, at least that level, in our first RTS game. So whenever we get around to making it, right? The Shambler asks, any plans for a 2v2 or free-for-all tournament in the near future? Well, I don't know how we would do a free-for-all tournament. I guess we would need a lot of force spawn maps that we rate for free-for-all specifically. And then we would need to decide, is it going to be 3 players? Is it going to be like Ascension groups or something where it's like play until, 1 player has 4 wins in the FFA segment, but then they still have to play in the other ones, right? So like, how would that work? So I don't know, like that would probably have to be a different format than Ascension. Like you can't do like King of the Hill style. 2v2s though, you could do King of the Hill style if you wanted to. You just have to have teams of 2 instead of teams of 1, right? Instead of individual players. So I'll think about formats. The Shambler actually suggested a format that was kind of like a hybrid between 2v2 and 1v1 because it was supposed to be that you'd like pick your team basically. Or you'd pick your teammate or something like that. In the context of a 2v2 tournament, I think it's absolutely feasible that we could do something like that. So, I mean, maybe Ascension 6 will be 2v2, or maybe we have a separate thing that's like, maybe we take a break before Ascension 6 and we play a team tournament that is more straightforward and isn't King of the Hill style. Like instead it's just a straight up like double elimination, best of 5 bracket. But obviously we need maps for that, right? So the Shambler has been working on a map called Cocytus recently. He also released a new map that is available on pre-release. That's 4 spawn. We're not 100% sure if it's not too big or whatever, so it definitely needs some testing. You can check those out in the work in progress folder in the pre-release stuff, because we did restructure the map layout and stuff. And now we have work in progress instead of non-standard, or instead of needs testing. And then I did move a bunch of maps to either non-standard or class 2 competitive. Class 2 competitive being maps that are not in the active map pool and might not actually be worthy of active map pool, but they're not exactly non-standard either, right? Like they're just maybe a couple below or something. Or maybe they're just waiting their turn, biding their time. But either way, I guess newer maps would go there as well, right? Like Pendulum and Oxytocin are there, for example. what else do we have in there? Oh yeah. Anyway, the Shambler has been working on maps recently, but what I would say to him is if we get enough maps that are actually good and we agree that like they work out well, then we could absolutely do a 2v2 tournament in the near future. But I think what's holding us back right now is absolutely maps. Most definitely. Then we need to do a lot of testing to make sure that, desyncs don't happen in 2v2s or whatever. Because obviously we did do some FFAs somewhat recently with just 4 players, and it was omnipresence, but I don't think that contributed to it. I think we had a desync when a Blime got AIDS'd, and I'm not sure why. Like maybe I didn't update the plugin for that version, and then he did an update, but he didn't get told he couldn't join. It could be something like that, because I do have to update the plugin every time I want to make it so that you can't join. So it could have been something as simple as that, and maybe it wasn't related to the actual game state, or maybe there's still something that we didn't catch about that, right? So we need to do more testing. But that's my answer to the Shamble Man. I don't know what we would do about an FFA tournament, by the way. Maybe people have suggestions for a format for that. We can talk about that in the server. The Beaver99 asks, who would win, 3 Durendals or 12 Ackmeds? Well, 12 Ackmeds, by the way, would absolutely mop the floor with 3 Durendals, but Luciferius did follow up this with more like who should win. And I don't know. People like the Durendal. They realize it's a pretty good unit. I think Ackmed always wins, and the Durendal uses Ackmed's portrait. So get fucked. Ackmed always wins. That's my answer to the question. 3Crow asks, have you ever considered making a regency that is actually a godlike entity manifesting itself on a grand scale? And he goes on to say, if such a regency were to exist, how would you classify it and how would it play? Would you depict the regency's factions as followers of the entity or as guided parts of its omnipotent will? Well, the answer to this question is Gamedev. So I did consider it because I did it. But when it comes to more broadly speaking, answering the flavor part of the question, which is talking about how would I classify, how would it play, I think you could do an angle where the Regency's faction, like the Regency's units, are followers of the entity, and then chosen aspects of it or something, make manifest or something to reward the faithful, and those are the higher tier units and stuff. And then maybe the absolute highest tier could be a more concentrated form of that, something like that, right? Or maybe you could even have this mechanic around, ascending the, followers into godhood or something like that. That could be kind of interesting too. So that's its own separate idea that I don't currently do, but I could even incorporate some aspects of that into Gamedev actually. Whereas guided parts of its omnipotent will is definitely more like what Gamedev is, because it doesn't have followers, it just is. And when you are taken over by Gamedev, you become Gamedev, right? Or maybe Gamedev becomes you, might be the more appropriate thing, but that you that's all the same, right? So it's hard to say that there's followers, because it's just that you've now become Gamedev. Congratulations, that's an achievement unlocked. But when it comes to how would it play, Gamedev is meant to play as something that spreads its tendrils around, so to speak, tries to incorporate anything nearby into it. And I think it would end up being very flexible, because it would have a lot of responses to draw upon. So it's, technologically speaking or whatever, it might be a little bit awkward to think about, because it's it has some of the finest minds that have fallen away that are no longer from extinguished races and stuff. It has data to draw upon from many different sources, engineers that are long gone, the races of which are long gone, soldiers and tacticians and stuff that have, served many wars and, countless battle information and all this other stuff. Right. So it has a lot of info. So it's operating with a significant advantage when it comes to the flexibility of its armada. But it might also look very scrap cobbly. I'm not 100% sure how I would do that, right? It's it would definitely have vehicles and aircraft or spacecraft. So it's not it doesn't have that. It's not this organic flesh thing, which you might think of if it's, becoming something. Or when I say spread its tendrils around, that might be what you think of. That's not exactly what it is. But there's definitely the idea that it would use this, a whole menagerie of entities because it's just assimilated so many different things as part of its quest to preserve unique matter. And Gadamemter is almost like the keeper of a museum or something in some ways, but like maybe a living museum or whatever. And the subjects that are not unique still serve a purpose. The aspects of Gadamemter still serve a purpose because they serve as the muscle to prevent the museum pieces from being trodden over or toppled or destroyed or stolen or pilfered or whatever. So there's definitely an aspect of that that's really interesting that, as far as classification goes, it's like the super intelligence, right? It's a super consciousness where you just have so much of it all over the place and it just assimilates so quickly anything that is willing. And, by willing, I almost have to have an asterisk there because it might basically destroy your entire, planet or, take over everybody you've never known and loved. And it's like, well, would you like to join now? And it's like, do I have a choice? I mean, yes, technically, but do I really? Like, I'm basically this or death, and it is kind of a death anyway. So it's quite a cosmic horror, idea. So maybe that helps to answer the question, but I think there's something really neat about the idea of taking it from another angle where the followers of, like, it's almost ambiguous as to whether or not the entity exists or is as powerful as they claim it is, but there's definitely something of power because of the whole Ascension mechanic, right? So that's kind of interesting, and I appreciate where this question made my mind go. But yeah, technically the answer to your question is I already did it, at least conceptually. And that brings us to the show outro, boys. That was it for coffee questions this time around. So we still managed to get this one in under 90 minutes. I'm sure when I started the coffee questions an hour plus in, you guys were like, oh shit, this episode's going to go forever. But we only had the small handful of questions here, right? So if you missed your question being answered this time around, make sure you are keeping your eyes peeled in the Ackmed Arsenal and the cause, what is it, Content Cauldron or something like that? Yeah. You can check those private channels out if you are a coffee supporter, and you can post your questions in the thread that I make after every prototype release for the next one. And I'll see you guys on the next one. But of course, until then, keep your eyes peeled for CMBW changes, improvements, content updates, and tournament matches, of course, as well as, when we're making all these videos and working on all of this single player stuff and trying to do all these other things that are not related to RTS stuff. Yeah, we've got our plate full here, but don't worry, we'll eat.